We want to welcome you back to Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
And obviously, for those of you watching on YouTube, we are in two different locations once again. Hopefully the audio is strong, and those of you listening through a podcast can hear this loud and clear. But man, between you and I, Gary, we have been all over the place, and we're going to continue a pattern of travel. So it might be a while before we're back in the same room together.
One of my mentors said, if you want to be at the right place at the right time, be a lot of places.
Well, you're much better at that than I. You have been in a lot of places in the last few months.
So, okay, well, let's count on that though, and that I'm in the right place.
Okay, fantastic. Well, as we tend to do, you and I chat a little bit before we begin the recording to talk about what is kind of weighing on our hearts and minds. And we've struggled a little bit today to narrow down a theme and a topic, but I'm going to trust that as we are both naturally curious people and kind of prod a little bit through some of the things that we've thrown out as some possibilities, that this is going to have a good theme emerge. And so I think one of the narratives that we had discussed is just that concept of rightness, and how in our own heads we are always right. And when we have conflict with somebody, it's really hard to see them as right. And if you are willing to concede that maybe there's a percentage of rightness that can be attributed to you and a percentage of rightness that can be attributed to the other person, it might be at least a meager beginning to starting some meaningful healing conversations. What do you think?
Well, sure. And this is the hard part, especially in our society today. There are many people that if one person holds a certain opinion, well, then not only is that opinion wrong, they're wrong and they're bad people and not to be trusted or need to be, I got to unfriend you on Facebook. I've got to block you on Twitter. I got to, right, get you out of my life because for some reason, the thing that you just espoused is so counter to who I am or trying to be that I can't even deal with you. I think that's an interesting one. It's tough growing up in the university environment I did, where we used to have debates. I was part of the debate team in high school and in college, and one of the common techniques was take the other side and argue that. And sometimes we'd discuss something and then you draw out of a hat which side you were on the debate. I love that, right? And so it seems like that would be. I'm wondering if they even still do that anymore.
I found myself thinking the same thing. I'm like, man, does debate even exist in, the course options for high school or for college anymore? And how beneficial would that be in this day and age? We just see these really just strong responses coming off from one side or the other. And like, what if you said, okay, stop, now you have to argue the other side, come up with some points that, that you can make on their behalf.
If you buy in to what I would, in my humble opinion, would state as fact that no one's 100% right or 100% wrong, and there is a percentage of right in there, or call it even a percentage of motivation, or a percentage of being. I think if two human beings are having a dialogue about something, I think you could start with the fact that we're two human beings, all just trying to do the best we can and survive in our little lanes, right? And so, goodness, I would think that we could at least start with, okay, there's 5% of you that I can find that isn't abhorrent to me. So can we start with the 5%? It just amazes me that folks will come into a situation and just believe, or at least act as if somebody else is 100% wrong, and an opinion defines a person.
But there has to be really a willingness to dig and find that 5%, so to speak, because when you're in a volatile relationship, the easiest, most comfortable things to do is just to shut down, make some assumptions, choose to believe in your own head, well, I've got it this right, they're wrong, and I'm just going to walk away from the whole thing. But if you're forced to be in relationship, whether because you're related or because there's a work communication that needs to happen, being intentional to find that 5% of connection can be monumental in beginning to repair relationship or to provide a different degree of insight, I suppose, to the other person. And I'm thinking to a few examples where, you may have two folks, relatives or otherwise, that you think differently about everything. You're on different sides of the political spectrum. You're on different sides of, I don't know, maybe even how you view the world in general. Maybe you have different faith practices, maybe everything is different. So how do you begin to find that nugget of likeness that you can use as a springboard for expanding the relationship a little bit?
It's interesting that you're mentioning this, because as you're talking about it, I'm thinking maybe part of our problem is we can just kind of dismiss or get rid of people out of our lives. I
Mm,
don't know if that's more easier or harder these days. But anyway, it used to be if you were in a small farming community, and I was in one growing up for a while, everybody knows everybody and people have their own little characteristics, but you just kind of accept that and you move on, and everybody's still part of that little community.
mm,
You don't have a choice. I mean, this isn't a, oh, well, I'm just going to leave, because you are in a community, you've got a farm, you ain't going anywhere.
mm,
And I feel like if you've got the opportunity where you can just say, well, I don't want to be in this conversation, or I don't want to be in this thing anymore, then it makes it real easy to just dismiss people or ideas. If you need certain people in your life, I mean, if you disagree politically with your doctor who's treating you, you don't really have a choice, right? For instance, so I'm wondering if we were in situations where we needed each other more, we'd be in better situations. I'm just trying to think through the whole COVID pandemic as people became
mm,
more and more isolated, if that might be part of the problem, why it seems like we poured Miracle Grow on our divisions, is because people can stay isolated. They can stay in their own head. They can
mm,
filter more all information and data and input into a frame of reference that gets more and more reinforced, and we don't have other viewpoints, etc. I'm struck whenever I go back to Brazil. My wife's family, everybody lives in the same house. I mean, we would go visit some of her relatives, and there is four generations,
mhm,
living in the same house. And I know this is true in Italy and other places too, European cultures where, boy, unless you get married, you stay in the house, and
mm.
even after that, there's many generations at once, and how rich of an environment is that for ideas? I mean, because just because an idea is old doesn't mean that it can be dismissed. There was a reason for that idea to be held at one point, and part of it is okay,
Yeah.
right? And yes, we can evolve, but that the perspectives, I think, are missing in today's culture and discourse. Am I
Yeah.
wrong on that?
No, I think you just highlighted something that I hadn't really considered. Just as over time, we've really migrated out of a communal way of life into a very isolated way of life. And it's easy to live alone and to function and to work and to shop without ever leaving your house.
Mm.
That would have been unheard of 20 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. If I so chose, I could be by myself in my house and have my groceries delivered to my door. I can work remotely and I could function, make money, spend money, do all of these things without ever leaving my four walls. And so it has kind of trained us to be very independent, very isolated, and the pressure to live in community is almost gone.
No, that's right. As a matter of fact, I saw a funny video. I think was it during COVID? I think it was, where somebody came up with this app where you never have to see another person. right? And the joke is that at one point somebody didn't do the app right, and the person opened the door to receive their stuff, and the person was still there. And I was like, ah, you know, I had to see another person, and and it was meant to be funny, but I tell you, the the isolated life, I think, is a tough life. I
Mm,
think it's a life that may feel comfortable in that you're not challenged, and maybe your ideas aren't challenged, and your sensibilities, your the way you view the world isn't challenged. But man, it seems like a pretty small life. I think
mm,
of life as larger and smaller. And the more I'm in my own head with my own little voices, the more smaller I feel like I am. And
mm.
the more I'm out talking, I mean, today I'm at a conference. I have talked to 100 people today at least. And that's in my element, you know me.
Yes.
But I mean, I'm feeling very large today. I've had new thoughts. I have been thinking about the implementation of EVs in neighborhoods, and what can we do until we have more capacity from the transformers. Anyway, this is stuff that I think about and I love thinking about. And I ran into some people today who said, Gary, that's not exactly right. We could do this, and then we could do this, and then we could do that. And it's like, ah,
Mm,
that's really cool. I hadn't thought of it that way. And I think that's, I guess, what this whole podcast is about, is being more curious,
yeah.
living life larger in asking questions and getting out of our own heads and
Yeah.
being more in the question and in the discussion, in the dialogue.
Yeah. I often think to the illustration of the seesaw, the old playground equipment that maybe even I don't know if every generation can even relate to what that is anymore, but imagine a plank on a rock, and you've got two kids, one on either side, and they force the pressure to make it rise and fall. And we so often in this more isolated environment have that seesaw mentality. Well, I'm right, and in order for me to rise up, that person has to come down. Or conversely, if someone else is making me low in order to be high, then I'm unhappy, I'm feeling marginalized, I'm feeling dismissed. And the point is not to be, all right and have the other person be all wrong. The point is to find a fun, this analogy doesn't work perfectly, but to find a fun balance where you can be eye to eye, you can converse, you can kind of have that fun feeling, that wiggly feeling of, oh, we're on uncertain territory right now, but we're having fun, even though we're not super stable. And so I don't know. I think back to that notion, and I hope that through this podcast, through the curiosity, through the forming of questions around how we do life, how we do relationships, maybe we come a little bit more to that wobbly balance in the middle, and choose to view it as fun, and not to view it as scary, and certainly not to approach our relationships where I'm going to rise up, so therefore you have to go down.
Well, and you're saying something here that's triggering other thoughts with me, with respect to feeling like I'm right or wrong.
Hmm.
And what we seem to be very averse these days to being wrong.
Hmm.
Like it's a race to be on the right side of something, and then we laugh or make fun of or even hate the people who don't have the same right opinion that we have come to
Yeah.
because we're so smart. And I think that's part of the problem, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be this black and white, right or wrong. There can be some stuff in the middle there that can still work for people. And I think that's one of the issues. I've always said, if we break down these larger issues into smaller things, we can maybe find an agreement on this part while we continue to work on the larger. And I think that we just, as you said earlier, it's easier to not do that. It's
Hmm.
easier to not be curious. It's easier to not think about somebody else's viewpoint as being partially right, because then I can just have my viewpoints and go on with my life, and just, it's harder to do that. But as we've talked about earlier, all growth, comes through struggle. And if we're not willing to struggle a little bit, then are we really growing?
Mhm.
If we can't have discussions with people, and I think I was going to say people we trust, and that's a whole nother issue we could go down a rabbit hole on. But if we don't have those discussions with people, um, that we have an open mind with, let's just put it that way, despite the level of trust, then how do we form our opinions in the first place?
Mm.
How do we, maybe that's something that we need to think about, is how do I get my opinions, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I know it used to be, pull your opinions off the fax machine in the morning. It used to be, a joke, whichever political party you were in, there was a fax machine in the corner of the campaign office, and you would pull off the sheet for the morning, and there's your talking points, right?
Mm.
And those talking points came from where, and trusting that person, and is that a good thing? And and who's writing that? So I think that's how do we form our opinions? How do we know that we're right? How do we even get to a position
Yeah.
these days?
Well, I think that's something that we all need to sit with for a little bit. How are we developing our thought process? And so, yeah, an important one for sure to contemplate. And the other thing that you mentioned that made me think of an expression that's being used a lot these days is, being on the right side of history. Well, you want to be on the right side of history, or conversely, you don't want to be on the wrong side of history. The irony is it's almost a statement forcing you to take a side, forcing you to take a position, assuming that whoever is casting that narrative knows which side is right and which side is wrong. But amazingly, if you were to get 25, 50 years down the line and look back at that moment, is that thing that's being touted as so important, does it even make a blip on the radar in the grand scheme of history, right?
It may not. I mean, I think at the end of our lives, we could probably look back and contemplate and think of how upset we got, or how our actions were so overly, um, overemphasized, given the insignificance of the individual decision or point of view.
Yeah. I think we have said this before, but if you were to be an observer at your own memorial service, the things that are mentioned about you, do you want it to be a resume list of, well, Gary stood strong on this principle and he fought for this initiative and he spent so much of his time and effort championing this? Like, is that really what you're going to be wanting to be highlighted about your life? Or is it, hey, let's have a time of open mic time and let people come up and share about the impact that Gary made in your life? To me, I would much rather the open mic time and have a long list of people that are wanting to say something about how I cared for them and how I invested in them, as a person, and much more, infinitely more than any position I took on any topic of the day.
Or how I help them on their individual journey, not
Yeah.
or and
Yes.
how I help them on their individual journey, as opposed to some, blanket general overall law that is very difficult to apply equally, fairly, or any of those other words that we like to use today. I think that's part of what is a constant enigma for me, is that sometimes I hear these stances and I'm thinking, okay, I understand kind of how you got there, especially given your experience and what you're trying to do. But that doesn't work for the people in Jal, New Mexico, right? It doesn't work for, it's a good goal for where you are and what you're trying to do. I mean, this is what our federal government, when it first started, recognized that a lot of the powers need to remain with the states, because what's good for Iowa is not good for California, is not good for Texas, is not good for Florida. And there's regional and cultural and other issues that say that, one blanket thing doesn't work for everyone. And
Hmm.
so, to your point, I would much rather be known as someone who worked in my little circle and helped people along life's journey in that circle, rather than trying to implement some grand scheme that was attempting to make, to work for everyone.
Hmm. Well, and then I would add, excuse me, if you're a person that is really needing to be right all the time, you may have a very short line at the microphone at your memorial service for people who want to get up and share, because those that need to be right often exclude others and isolate themselves and break relationship.
And this is the biggest problem with everything that we're talking about today. And that is, it's all about relationships. Life is all about relationships.
Yeah.
And if you are happy with your relationships and you have an ever expanding influence, a positive influence on people's lives, and you're really helping people to live healthier, more productive lives and have more hope and joy and peace,
Hmm.
uh, that's probably a good indicator that you're on a good path. If you are doing the opposite and you're alienating people and you're intentionally trying to block or cut people off, you know, is that a good way to go?
Mm. I just noticed that I'm wearing my one Albuquerque shirt. That's the slogan that the city came up with a few years ago about, that we all live together in this city. We're to be, one people together living in this city, even though we're comprised of many cultures and languages and backgrounds. And while there is absolutely the opportunity to see ourselves in one community, to your point, there's never going to be a time when we're all going to be in total agreement and total alignment on the way that we view the world. And so, how do you, with other people that are very different than you, live together in a harmonious relationship where you are part of a thriving community and you don't have to be right all the time?
It's very difficult, and it's so funny because we used to come together as a city on certain things and say, let's go do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be harder and harder and harder. We just celebrated an anniversary. I think it was the 20th anniversary. I'm not sure, of the new Isotopes Stadium. We have a AAA ball club here, and it was going to go away. It was used to be called the Albuquerque Dukes, and it was literally going to go away. It was bought by some team in the Northwest or something. That was going to go away, and a group of people in Albuquerque got together and said, you know what? Let's get a new team here. Let's redo the stadium, and let's have something, a good place where people can gather together, feel community, etc. And we did it, and
Mm-hmm.
we spent, I don't know if these numbers are perfect, but like $20 million to upgrade the stadium and get a new team here. And it's made $31 million back for the city, and it's provided a great place, a venue where people come together from all walks and do things. Well, now we've got an opportunity for a soccer stadium, right? And I'm realizing as I'm saying that this is controversial in and of itself, but to me, that's a no-brainer. I mean, this is a place where different cultures can come together and, whoop and holler for a good team outing event, a good, wholesome, clean fun. And we ought to do that. But boy, the minute you say that, you've got some other folks who say, well, no, we should be spending that money in this way, or we should be spending the money this way, or we shouldn't be spending money on a sports team. We should be doing this. I get all of those arguments, but man, it seems like it was easier in the past to come together and say, hey, this is something that's going to be good for the community. Here's a community amenity that we can all kind of get behind and realize that this is going to be good for us.
Yeah.
Let's do this. And that seems, I can't even think of a single item where we could all agree right now is a good thing to do.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe we've come full circle then is, can we begin to be intentional about looking for that 5% where we do agree? 5% of someone else's opinion where you can kind of go into that thought process. And, whether we're talking about building a stadium or something else, maybe the only thing you agree on is you both like hot dogs. Maybe you are different sports fans. Maybe you hate each other's teams, but you both like hot dogs. Can we start there?
Right, exactly.
Well, Gary, thank you. I know that you are in conference mode. You've got a lot going on, and we'll just probably wrap this up for today, and looking forward to continuing the conversation from wherever we find ourselves in the weeks to come. But as always, want to encourage people, share some thoughts with us. We love to see your comments, whether you're writing comments on YouTube or leaving comments on the various podcast channels, or just sending us a direct note right there on curiositynotjudgment.com. Love to hear what's on your mind. So maybe give us some thoughts about those 5% overlaps of where you and your person that you disagree with, where have you found common ground? And maybe that can spur some further conversation down the road.
Until then, take care.
All right, everyone have a great day. See ya.